Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Members of the private sector, members of the public sector, representatives of the diplomatic community, specially invited guests, good evening and welcome to the 5th public lecture by the Guyana Oil and Gas Association, which will be delivered by Mr. Edward Brathwaite, Director and Principal Consultant, Incredible Safety Services Limited. I do recognize that there are some of our directors of GOGA within the audience, Mr. Nigel Hughes and Mr. John Chin. This is a part of GOGA's undertaking to provide public information to the general audience of Guyana to understand topics as it relates to the development of the oil and gas industry. The theme of this public lecture is the cultural impact on safety in oil and gas. Recently, our partner for this event, Eldorado Offshore Guyana Inc., who has assisted GOGA in hosting this forum, was appointed as the manpower provider for the Stena Carina drillship by Stena Drilling. Stena selected 12 Guyanese nationals through Eldorado Offshore Guyana Inc. to fulfill various positions within the drill ship operation. And currently, those individuals are offshore. So I think it is quite appropriate that we hold a forum on the cultural safety and cultural policy. The offshore oil and gas industry is among the most developed in the world. Although drilling and production and producing of oil and gas are intrinsically hazardous activities, the early history of the offshore oil and gas industry demonstrates priority given to production over safety as a result of constant pressure to recoup the huge investment made in these areas, in particular leases, structures, equipment, and personnel as rapidly as possible. Hence, Guyana must ensure that it develop a safety culture from the very start of the offshore-related task. Some have defined safety culture as the core values and behaviors of all members of an organization that reflect a committed and a commitment to conduct business in a manner that protects people and the environment, and articulated 9 characteristics or elements for a robust safety culture. And these are leadership commitment to safety values and actions, respectful work environment, environment for raising concerns, effective safety and environmental communication, personal accountability, inquiring attitudes, hazard identification and risk management, work processes, and continuous improvement. Although there exists no single definitive set of elements that constitute safety culture, the various versions of those elements overlap considerably. Thus, the development of a local safety policy must encompass all of the characteristics that was listed earlier. Despite the many definitions of safety culture, overall consistency across industries regarding the essential elements of such a culture enables the establishment of norms to facilitate clear communication across systems and across industries. A robust safety culture permeates an entire industry. Accordingly, safety culture needs to flow from the top of the industry, whether it is the operator, the contractor, or the subcontractors, to all the workers in the offshore locations, including contractors and subcontracting staffs, while being supported by the regulatory environment. Safety culture is not a it's not a destination. It needs to continuously adapt, evolve, and be redefined from time to time. As we all know, the oil and gas industry is not a static industry. It's a dynamic industry with changing cultures, changing workforce, and changing technologies that improve the recoverability of the oil and gas sector. Creating a strong, safety culture requires alignment, efforts, resources, and time. Research demonstrates that safety culture is significantly enabled by all leaders, commitment to safety, action, and actions that reflect broad personal accountability for safety, consistent safety communication, an attitude of inquiring throughout the organization or industry, diligent hazard identification, and swift management of identified hazards, and a respectful work environment that encourages raising concerns and addresses unsafe conditions. A strong safety culture is reinforced and sustained by structured learning practices focused on continuous improvement. The safety standards and culture of any industry, and in particular for our cause here, the oil and gas, must be continuously improved. Therefore, Guyana's upstream oil and gas industry must focus on developing, measuring, and getting executive support for safety culture. Ladies and gentlemen, those kind words are the reasons why we are here this evening. It's the reasons why GOGA has chosen to put the theme of the 5th public lecture, the cultural impact on safety in oil and gas, as part of its lecture series. I'll now invite our presenter to go through his very entertaining presentation. I'm sure you would all enjoy. He is, as the brochure indicates, the principal consultant and director of the company. His information is at the back, so I don't need to go through that in details. And I think we look forward to the questions following the presentation, particularly as it relates to the development of safety culture and safety policies for the emerging oil and gas sector. Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone, members of the private sector, public sector, the diplomatic service, specially invited guests, other directors of GOGA. In addition to Bobby Gosai, we have Nigel Hughes and John Chin. I'd like to also say a good evening to the team from El Dorado. Thank you so much for your support in this event. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, good evening. Now, if I look a little awkward throughout tonight, it's because I'm mindful that the way this is set up, I'm expected to stay at the lectern. Those of you who know me very well know that I normally walk around with a clip-on mic, and I'm usually in and amongst the crowd, but that's not going to work this evening. Let me first of all thank GOGA once again for extending this invitation to us to be here and to share some of our experience with you. I want to start by saying that I do not want you all to see this as a lecture where I come and tell you about safety standards and regulations and policies, but rather see it as a sharing of experience through my experience in the oil field and what we have seen in Trinidad and in particular on the rigs and platforms that we have worked with. Now, I like to start off by acknowledging the place I'm in, and the reason I'm here as a visitor and not as a returning national is that in 1956, quite unfortunately, quite suddenly, my grandfather passed away. He was a doctor and he had his practice just below his home on Newmarket Street. Is that correct? That's the. And then they had a subsequent house at Crown Street as well. When he passed away, my grandmother moved her 3 children to Trinidad to be with the rest of her family who were involved in the Federation at the time. So that is my rather flimsy connection to Guyana, and so I shall use it to say that it's good to be home.
Welcome.
Now, quick show of hands, how many people have interacted with safety professionals before? A few. Okay, good. So some experience. How many people of those think that safety professionals are a pain in the neck? We'll go with neck. Okay, a couple of hands. So it's not a trick question. In my profession, you really have to learn to laugh at yourself from time to time, otherwise you go crazy. And for those of you who don't think that safety professionals are a pain in the neck, clearly you haven't met enough of them. On the screen behind me, you'll see a picture of a drill ship, and I've gone to great lengths to make sure and find a picture of the actual drill ship that ExxonMobil has used to drill the Liza 1 and 2 discoveries. So this is the actual Stena rig that Bobby was referring to a little earlier. And just as I recall, I want to really congratulate and thank Bobby for such an extensive and well-articulated introduction to what safety is all about. In fact, I don't think I need to say anything else. So, congratulations, Bobby. That was actually very well done. We could do some work together. So I'd like to start where this all really begins. The United Nations has listed some odd 30, 35 universally declared human rights. Every human being on the planet is entitled to these rights. And I've just selected just a few of them as our starting point, because that is where this story begins. We are entitled to life, the right to life, liberty, and personal security. Freedoms from slavery, that's a very important thing in our part of the world. And the last one I have there is the right to desirable work and to join trade unions. Perhaps I should not emphasize that last part, but I want to emphasize the desirable work. Because for those of us who work in the field of health and safety, that is the core of our mission, to make sure that the work that our people engage in is desirable and does not leave any negative, lasting impact on them or their families or communities. Related to these rights and the work of the UN, they've identified a number of sustainable development goals, and goal number 8 is to promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. Now, when we originally started discussions about this lecture, we were hoping to have this done in April, the last week in April, which coincides with Occupational Safety and Health Week every year around the world. And so the ILO has had this poster to promote that effort this year. And it was really around collecting data, but not just for collecting data's sake. It's for collecting data so as to be able to learn and improve. So let me start, given that I'm one of the first voices speaking about safety, health and safety in the oil and gas business in the nascent oil and gas industry here in Guyana. Let me start by stating that safety is good business. There are many people, and there are quite a few of them will go to great lengths to convince you that safety is expensive, it's inconvenient, it's time-consuming, and all these other things. The fact is, safety is good business. The best companies, financially, are the ones that get safety right. Now, I know that sounds really abstract, so to explain what I'm trying to tell you, I'm going to use a much simpler example. When we think of companies and industries, it gets kind of confusing. So let's use something a little more basic. A taxi to the airport. I got one this morning, and I'm going to get another one tomorrow. There's an agreement, a contract. The driver comes, picks me up, takes me to the airport on time so that I can catch my flight, provided that Caribbean Airlines does not delay. I see a few people have some experience with that. So in Trinidad, at the Hyatt, which is more or less just like this hotel, they have a number of these taxis around, and you can phone them up for hire to take you here, there, and everywhere. Now this is a picture of one of those actual taxis, and that's a picture I took when I got out of my truck, because this gentleman had rearranged my fender and so forth. See, he was in a bit of a hurry, and as a taxi driver, he earns his income by picking up passengers and taking them to where they need to be, for which they pay him a reasonable fare. But in this instance, where he was going to and the time he was going for became irrelevant. So the question, if that was a passenger waiting to go to the airport, did that passenger obtain an on-time check-in? Not likely, because at the very last moment they were probably wondering, where's my taxi? I need to get another one, and they probably would have ended up late. Not to mention, this taxi driver didn't get his money for that passenger that he failed to pick up. So of course, one of the consequences of that is maybe he starts to get a bad reputation. Well, this guy, you hire him, he doesn't turn up. Or this guy, you hire him and maybe you get into an accident. Then there's the repair time and the repair cost. In this case, he was looking at probably something like 10,000 US worth of repairs to this vehicle. All while, he is unable to use said vehicle to earn a living. So instead of having money coming in and continuing to have access to his vehicle is out of commission and he's having to take money out. And it's the same with business. No matter what business you're in, what activity set you're involved in, when you have unplanned negative incidents, it costs you money and stifles your income stream. So if you invest time and energy into getting it done right the first time, you can safeguard your income, your revenue, and your profits to reinvest in your business. Fair enough? And you won't have all these other negative entanglements to deal with. And so therefore, the saying goes, an ounce of prevention beats a pound of cure. Come and think of it, I probably should have had some pictures of mangoes. That might have been more, relatable. So, in the oil and gas business, Bobby would have talked about, I think it was 9 or 11 elements of a good safety culture. I'll break it down into 3. What do we need to have in order to have a good safety culture and good safety performance? In oil and gas, we tend to refer those to plant, procedures, and people. You spend money, time, and you make sure you have the best plant. That's your equipment, your facilities, your factory, all the things that you use. Think about it like buying your car. You want to make sure you have the best car that your money can buy. You don't want to buy a jalopy that's unreliable or unsafe. Then you have procedures, the way that you use these things in order to obtain the result that you're looking for. The best ways to use it. Think of it like a recipe, right? You're trying to make banana bread or, pilau. There's a list of ingredients, there's a list of materials, and there's a way that you need to put them together so that it comes out and it tastes the right way. It's the same thing with an operation on a drilling rig, on a platform. There are procedures that you have to follow. And then last, and the most crucial aspect of it, is the people. You put 4 walls, a door, a couple windows, and a roof. That's just a house. But it's not until you add the people that it becomes a home. You can have a football, but no football game until you add the people to the mix. And shockingly, this is the part of that triad that people pay the least attention to. So what I want to talk to you about this evening is that aspect of it, the people. So I got myself a nice cute picture of children from all over the world, and at this age, this is probably the only time they really don't care what each other looks like. If you're willing to play with me, then that's great. When we get older, then we bring in our cultural biases and other things that we've learned that makes working together a little more challenging. And so if you're not aware, and perhaps Bobby alluded to it a little earlier, every oil and gas installation is a cross-cultural workplace. You will meet people from all over the world. And if you've come to that workplace only working with people from Guyana, then you're going to be in for a bit of a shock. So let's dig right into it. And I see we have a pilot in the crowd. So he's going to appreciate a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight. And the reason I choose aviation is that there's a lot that the aviation industry has learned a lot faster than the oil industry has, and a lot they've gotten right a lot faster than we have. And there's some good lessons that we can learn as we go forward from here. So you see, you have your standard cockpit. I don't know if this is a 737, doesn't matter. You have your captain on the left, you have your first officer on the right, and we certainly hope that they work together in such a way that we get where we're going safely. I certainly have that hope, because tomorrow I will be on one of these things myself. But that isn't always the case. Take, for example, the case of 35 years ago, Air Florida Flight 90. An American airline, they were taking off from Washington. And the first officer noticed, it was in the height of winter, you see the date was January. The first officer noticed that there was a lot of ice on the wings of the aircraft. Now, if I had to ask you to do that, do you think, to tell your captain that there's a lot of ice on the wings, would you think that would be easy to do? I see a lot of blank stares. It would be easy, right? You would think it would be easy. Now let's remember, however, that the captain is the first officer's boss. So let me ask you again. Do you think you'd be able to tell your boss that there's a lot of ice on the wings?
Yes, sir. If you believe it dangerous.
If you believe it dangerous?
Yeah, if it comes to mind.
If it comes to mind. Okay. So it should be fairly straightforward.
Sure.
It should. As you can see from the photograph, in this case, it did not work out that way. The first officer used a string of statements like this. Boy, spraying that de-icer on those wings over there is just a false sense of security. Boy, that's a lot of ice on those wings back there. Now, if you're his boss, how are you listening to him? How are you interpreting what he has said? Have you gotten from him that there's something that's urgent that you need to address? He's giving you hints. It's kind of like your wife saying, "Well, these are really nice shoes, don't you think?" What does a typical husband do? Ignore or forget, much to his peril. And I dare say that is exactly what happened in this case. And there's been a lot of studies about what happens in the cockpit because of the potential for the impact to the conduct of the flight. And these two linguists, Fisher and Orasanu, determined that there are 6 types of what they call mitigated speech. Mitigated speech is speech that we use when we're either being polite, or we're ashamed or embarrassed, or we are being deferential to authority. Which one do you think applied to Air Florida Flight 90? The co-pilot was being deferential to authority. Now it's important at this point that I point out that both pilots were Americans. That's going to become important later on. But these linguists, in their study, they presented 6 different levels of mitigated speech. At the top is the command, which is the least mitigated you can get. Turn right 30 degrees now. That's a command. And what I gave you just now is what the co-pilot actually said, and those were hints. Those are the most mitigated ways of saying something, and therefore the least effective at communicating an urgent idea. Bear in mind, both Americans, same culture. And in sitting next to his captain, this is the approach that first officer chose. Yeah? And that's because the language we use is based on the values that we hold. So right away we see how important language is in our communication and how important that is in obtaining a safe outcome, which is why Bobby's introduction was so awesome, because he covered all of that in the start. So let's go back to the cockpit. Let's look at another example. Avianca Flight 52. Now this is a Colombian airline. So in the first example we had 2 Americans in the cockpit. In the second example we have 2 Colombians in the cockpit. And the captain is flying an aircraft which is very difficult to fly. And they're flying into the United States. And it's been a long flight, and they've put them on 3 separate holding patterns that has added 80 to 90 minutes to their flight. So they're way behind schedule. They're running out of fuel, and the captain is getting frustrated. So he's barking orders at his first officer to communicate with the air traffic control. Find out which is our runway. Tell them I can't see it. Tell them we're running out of fuel. It's an emergency. Do you want to know what the first officer actually said? In response to the air traffic control, who, in his mind, is his boss's boss, he says, copy that, turn right 180 degrees, and we will make another try. We're running out of fuel. When that happened, they were able to conclude within 2 days that the aircraft didn't fail. There were no systems that didn't work. There was no pilot error. The aircraft just ran out of fuel, out of gas, and dropped out of the sky. Now, put yourself in that cockpit. You're running out of fuel and you're worried about being able to land this thing after you've burnt up all that time in holding patterns. Why is it that the co-pilot would use such bland language in explaining to the air traffic control what their situation was? And that's where we come back to where they come from. There's a cultural aspect that was uncovered in this and other similar aviation disasters. Because Colombians hold a different view to authority than Americans do. So they respond and discuss with people they consider in authority in a different way. And based on the linguists, what type of speech would they use? Mitigated speech. Probably the most mitigated speech available. And when you consider that they are now speaking a language that's not their natural language, you can see some of the difficulties that they would get into. Those of you who speak more than one language will know that as you get physically tired, your ability to competently speak that second language starts to erode dramatically. So these guys were in a lose-lose situation from day one. Now, that example those 2 examples actually are well outlined in Malcolm Gladwell's book, and I put up the reference there in case you wanted to follow on with it, where he discusses both incidents. And he introduces this guy, Gert Hofstede. And Professor Hofstede has done a lot of work outlining and defining cultures around the world using 6 different dimensions. And if you go onto his website, you can actually do your own research and compare two competing countries to see how they are different. And the 6 dimensions are power distance, individualism, masculinity, uncertainty avoidance, long-term orientation, and indulgence. I will only focus on 4. Power distance, individualism, long-term orientation, and indulgence. So let me give you a brief description of what those things mean. Power distance, you can think of it as the degree or extent to which people see each other as equals. So if you're a garbage man and you live on the same street with the CEO of a big company, to what extent do you see yourself as an equal person with that gentleman or lady? Individualism versus collectivism is the extent to which each man is expected, man or woman, I'm just using the generic term, is expected to look after his or her own needs within the society. Long-term orientation, as the name suggests, is the predisposition to looking ahead to the future and assessing the future against what is happening now. And indulgence is the extent to which we raise our children to have their wants met now. So it's the extent to which we train our children to meet their needs and wants now, as opposed to sacrificing now for some future outcome. And on the drilling rig that I was last assigned to, the Sapura Kenchana Jaya, which was working in Trinidad until August last year, we had the typical diverse multicultural workplace. We had an expat supervisory crew, and we had a local junior crew fulfilling a number of roles throughout the spectrum. The expats came from countries like the United Kingdom, the USA, Canada, Australia. We had one from Bangladesh, a wide range of countries. But the majority would be Canada and the United States. And that's important because, as I said, especially with the aviation examples, where you come from matters. Quick aside joke here. I went to a training session one time and they asked you to rate, if you were in a wildfire in the bush, to rate the things that you would do, and they gave you a list of 10 things, the things that you would do in order of priority. One of those things was jumping into the water tank and waiting for jumping into the water tank and waiting out the fire. And another one was grabbing the keys to your car, which had a full tank of gas, and getting the hell out of there. So of course, me and two other trainees are in this course, and we all put down, grab the keys and get the hell out of there, right? Well, it turns out the experts did not agree. They say you should jump in the water tank and wait for the rescue services to come for you. And that's where you realize where you come from matters. Because clearly, where those experts are from, there will be rescue services coming looking for you. In Trinidad, in the bush, not so much. So, where you come from can color how you see a situation and how you respond or react to it. So all of that comes into play, and hopefully you'll see pretty shortly how it all comes together. But we started this drilling campaign in 2011 with this multicultural crew, and we found that we were having too many incidents. There were either too many little incidents, and what was even more worrying is we were starting to see incidents that had no lasting outcome but had very high potential. So we started digging into what was causing this. And we realized that one of the key weaknesses in the entire crew, which we had not addressed adequately at the start, was the level and extent to which they communicated with one another. It boiled down to an issue of communication. Now, I am sure, I'm looking at the crowd, adults and so on, I'm sure if you are married, you came home to your parents one day and said, well, I met this person yesterday and we've decided to get married. I see a guy laughing already. Your parents would laugh you out the room, right? Because your parents know that if you want a marriage to last, you've got to take the time to build the foundation of the relationship. So the theory goes. And of course, the more traditional view is to take that time and get to know each other and work on your communication skills and so forth. But somehow, shockingly, when we're starting a business or an industry, we pay no attention to that. And remember, it is the people that make the business work. So if the people have not been prepared to work together, you can expect that there'll be problems down the line. So what we ended up having to do, and I say we, the royal we, I was tasked with doing the job. But I took a look at Professor Hofstede's work, and I passed out 3 main countries that were involved in this particular operation. You'll see the United States, and I use that as a proxy for all the expat supervisors, because generally that's where they came from. You will see Malaysia on that list, and the reason I put Malaysia is because that was the last place this rig had worked, and these same supervisors had worked in that location. And then I put Trinidad and Tobago, which is where the rig was working at the time. And right away you can see that the bars don't add up, they don't line up, they're not the same. And I will attempt to explain to you why that's important. You can see on the first graph, power distance index, the extent to which people view each other as equals, that Trinidad and the United States has a more or less equivalent view in that regard. But in Malaysia, it's at 100%. What does that mean? It means that the society is highly stratified. It means that if you are a person of rank in that society, people who are lower in rank than you dare not speak to you without your permission. And if they speak to you in a way that is deferential to your position. Now, there's a reason I made a point of highlighting the American pilots and the Colombian pilots. Guess where Colombia's power distance index is? It's at 63. So that separation between ranks is more amplified than in the American scenario. So the first officer talking to his captain is going to speak very softly and say please at the end. And when his captain instructs him to speak to the air traffic controller, an American person, who he sees as his captain's boss, how deferential do you think they're going to be? They're not going to communicate in a way that is forceful, that says, we have a problem here, that you need to take me seriously, and we need a runway now. They're not going to say that. They're going to say, copy that, 180 degrees, turn right, and we're running out of fuel. In fact, when they interviewed the air traffic controllers in the inquiry that followed, they both commented that there seemed to be no urgency in the co-pilot's statements. Particularly when you consider that by definition, any plane that is landing is by definition running low on fuel. They didn't see it as anything particularly important and did not know he was really in trouble. So imagine yourself at a restaurant. I think I will have the chocolate cake, and I'm choking on a chicken bone. I don't think the waiter will read, excuse me, what did you say? So that's the power distance index. Individualism, and the reason we had to focus on this is this. The supervisory crew were expats, from the United States generally, the local crew from Trinidad. Power distance index, they see each other as equals. But look at what happens with individualism. Whereas in the United States, their individualism score is high, in Trinidad, it's rather low, which means, in general, we are a collectivist society. So everything is fine until the supervisor reprimands you. And when he reprimands you, what happens? You retreat into the collective. And in the case of our rig, that was the OWTU, the trade union that represented them. So every time there was a performance appraisal and somebody didn't like the score they got, suddenly everybody was wearing red and talking about going on strike. Because everybody want to play man by themselves until things turn sour, then they get into the group. And this is what we were seeing in the course of the work that we were doing. So this is something that I'm advancing to you as something to pay attention to as you go in to the development of your oil and gas business, because you're going to have to figure out where you sit in all of this. I'm sorry, I couldn't find the data on Guyana in this database, but maybe you'll be able to tell me if you're similar to Trinidad or not.
You know to get the job done.
I know. I have heard that. I have seen that. So the other area I wanted to highlight was long-term orientation and indulgence. And you will note that in Malaysia, their long-term orientation is quite a bit higher than the United States and Trinidad, right? And in other countries, it's much higher, like Germany and so on, where they really pay attention to the future horizon and planning for it. And I guess, using Trinidad as an example, we have certainly struggled with that. We tend to see things in 5-year horizons for some reason. Don't know what it has to do with, but strategic visioning is not our strong point. And when you look at these scores, you can kind of infer why. Then when you look at indulgence, it's the extent to which people want to satisfy their needs and wants in the now, as opposed to sometime in the future. So when you look at these two scores side by side, they kind of complement each other. You can see that in the bars. And Trinidad's score is higher than most, and I don't know if Carnival has anything to do with that. Just saying. And certainly we've had a lot of years in the oil and gas business that probably predisposes us to behaving in that way. But the reason I bring those up is that when you are building a safety culture, when you're trying to do a job and you are trying to plan for safety, those are two things that are coming into play immediately. You have to somehow look into the future and determine what are the risks or the hazards that you face and how you mitigate against those. And then you have to determine what are the things that you need to do now in order to obtain that future outcome. Now I'll put it to you, if your indulgence score is 80, that's going to be very difficult. So in my practice, what I have found is, I have found this model to be very useful in order to understand what is happening between people. Because you see, the words we use, the things we say are based on our life experience, where we come from, the things that we believe. But you don't always see what someone believes. You have to figure that out over time. It's easy to see what they say, but to figure out what they believe, that takes a little bit of time. And what I'm trying to suggest that it's worth your while as a society to try and figure out what you believe in relation to the oil and gas industry, and in particular, safety in the oil and gas industry. You've got to take the time to figure that out now so that you can build a safety culture that meets your society where it is, rather than trying to force fit it to something that it is not. It allows you the opportunity to, having identified potential weaknesses, put in programs or strategies to try and bolster those so that they don't manifest themselves in a negative way. Now, to illustrate my point, this is a picture at Mount Hope in Trinidad, the tertiary hospital. It's outside the pediatric wing of the hospital. I'm not sure if I have permission to take this picture, but I think we can all agree there are no patients in it, so I think we should be okay. So the question is, which path would you take? As you can see, there's a concrete walkway, there's a semicircular part, there's a straight part here and a straight part there. Which path would you take? Show of hands. Any volunteers? Would you walk straight through? Yeah? Walk through, yeah. It seems logical, right? You're going that way, you walk straight through. And that's what Trinidadians do. They walk straight through the grass. The poor grass has no chance of growing there. But an interesting thing happened, and that's why I took this picture. I went to Singapore a few years ago. You know, Trini boy in Singapore, you know, checking out the scene, going for lunch, and there was this grass park. It was a block that they just hadn't developed. So there was a walkway around and a concrete footpath through. And we had to get through it to get to where we were going to get lunch. And do you know what I noticed? Not a man, woman, or child dared to walk on the grass, when clearly there was a straight path through the grass. They walked only on the the concrete pathway. How is that for indulgence? Having your needs and wants met now or in the future? Now, it's a very simple example with a footpath. Try to imagine that there's a procedure of how to do something on an offshore drilling rig or a production platform. One way is the right way, and it's kind of long. The other way is much shorter. Which one are you going to do? Which one do you think, in general, your people are going to do? And it's summarized in this one example. Also on that trip to Singapore, I came out of the hotel, you know, trying to get a taxi to go and get something to eat later in the evening. And what I thought, you come out and you wait for a taxi to pass and you hail it out, and they stop, they pick you up, and you go. And I noticed this giant L on the pavement. And I thought, well, that's a curious thing, a giant L on the pavement. What's that doing there? And as I waited for a taxi, I saw one local come and stand on the L. Then another, and another, and another. The L on the pavement is for you to form a queue waiting for your taxi. So you, with your Caribbean self, need to get with the program and follow the rules. But you see, we are schooled in a slightly different way in Trinidad. I don't want to project onto anybody else. We have some challenges with where we're supposed to be and what lane and so on. And we see the same attitude in our workplaces and on our offshore drilling rigs. Guys are taking shortcuts because it's more convenient to their particular program. Well, boss man, I want to go and get lunch, you know. Right? I with a chap, he was a roustabout, and you'll just nod and pretend like you know what that means. It's just a general labor around the rig. And we asked him to put a certain material into the drilling mud, but he had to put it in at 2 sacks per hour for the next 4 hours, because we had to have the right concentration in the mix, right? 15, 20 minutes later, we see him back on the deck sweeping. What you doing? I thought you down in the mud room, the pump room, you know? The sack room, adding in the... Yeah, I don't calculate 8 sacks and pour all in one time. Right? Of course, that was not the best thing for the drilling mud. But that's what he did, because that it met his needs now, not in the future. So, as I draw to a close, we laugh about pavements, queues for a taxi, how you're going to talk to your boss. And I want you to look at this image here. That's the rig floor of a typical drilling rig. There's a lot of heavy machinery, stuff that is energized. There's a big drum there that's pulling at things. And people are standing literally in harm's way. Doing the job the right way requires them to do it the safe way each and every time. And having their needs met over and above the procedures that are outlined is not something that is easily tolerated, or not something that usually ends well. And we've got to make sure that our workforce is prepared to work in an environment like that, and that we understand the perspective that our workforce is coming from, getting into that environment. There's a lot going on. There's hydrocarbons in pipe, there's fluids at temperature, there's chemicals being used, there's high voltage installations and connections, there's a lot of machinery moving sometimes simultaneously, there's a lot of noise, there's things that have to be managed. And we have to be able to craft an environment where we can see what is happening, we can see into the future what are the things we need to do, and we can identify the hazards therein and be prepared to take the appropriate actions now in order to obtain that safe outcome later. And more importantly, we have to have an environment where it is okay for the junior man on the job to speak up about the concerns he sees in the operation. And the supervisors have to be mature enough to listen when they hear it and not ignore. And these things I'm putting to you are functions of the cultures of the people involved in the operation. So, what are the takeaways? Safety is good business. Don't let anybody fool you. You have your taxi example that you're armed with, that you can rebut any arguments to the contrary. As you go about operations in the oil and gas, focus on conversation quality. The conversation has to be meaningful, it has to be real, people have to be listening and acting in good faith. Your culture will be a starting point. You've got to know where you are before you can figure out where you're going. And then you have to take the time to prepare to work together. It's very easy. Oh, let's start up a company, we're going to provide this service and boom, and get the financing. That's the easy part. The soft human interaction part, that's the real difficulty. And if we don't get that right, we're going to struggle all the way. I certainly saw it on the Jaya when it worked in Trinidad for the 5 years, and it is something that I have taken away from that experience as something that has to be addressed seriously before any operation can begin. At the start, I talked about safety professionals being a pain in the neck, but there are 2 reasons why that is. April 20th, 2010. This was a scenario that faced the energy industry. It threatened to change the way we access our energy forever. 15 men lost their lives. 15 families. $650 million of asset at the bottom of the ocean. Oil pouring ashore, damaging the environment around. Now, I'm not trying to oversimplify what happened in this particular case, but as in the case of aviation disasters, there's always an element of communication in what leads into this. All of the equipment and the processes were available to avoid such an outcome. What made the difference is the quality of the conversation that took place with the human beings on board this facility, to the peril of 15 men and countless others who were impacted by this incident. This is the second reason that safety professionals are a pain in the neck. Because there is nothing more precious, nothing more valuable, nothing more worthy of defense than this. This is why we go to work in the first place. We have families, we have children we want to educate and have a better life than the ones we did. None of that works if people don't come home from work. And it certainly doesn't work as well if we come home from work missing significant parts. Not to mention, of course, the psychological trauma that goes with that. So the next time you're annoyed by your resident safety professional, remember that he or she is operating from this place. Because your life and the lives of their co-workers is more important to them than what you think of them. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Edward, thank you for a very insightful presentation on which you touched on various topics. And just before we actually started this evening, we were talking about going to school, and some of our professors would give us practical examples. Edward gave us some very practical examples in which we can narrow into on industries and the development of safety policies, safety culture, on the overall climate of safety within any organization, within any industry. The one thing I think that we all know is that the development of an emerging oil and gas sector will bring with it new safety and new standards. And we hope that that can spill over into other industries as well, as Guyana continues to develop. We will now open the floor to questions directed to Edward on his presentation. The floor is open.
Is there a manual you provide for safety in the oil and gas industry as a company? So, not quite yet. We're a fairly new consulting practice. We are developing a software tool for our customers to use, but the main thrust of our practice is simplicity.
After this many years of doing that, are you happy that you're explaining to the employees how dangerous it is in the world? Use the same measures. I remember when we first rolled the seatbelts again. It wasn't taken up. You never took the time to explain to them why they're in your seatbelts. I'm wondering how much of a challenge that is in Trinidad as years from now. When it comes to this again. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. So if I understand you correctly, you're trying to assess whether or not we have done the work to make that decision easier for people.
For people to take up a suggestion. You're saying you need to wear a hard hat.
Yes.
Have we spent enough time in the curriculum to explain why you should wear a hard hat?
I would say no. I was on a project site last week, and we experienced this. This is a construction site, by the way, but we experienced this offshore as well. We have a few Rastafarian guys around, right? So they've got the dreadlocks, and then the hard hat is perched at the top, you know? So clearly we haven't done a good job of explaining why this stuff is important. I think what we've typically done is gone the route of, these are the rules, follow them. But as I've pointed out in some of the cultural dimensions, that's really not going to work. So it has, what I have found is the most important part of my career and my subsequent, now my practice in health and safety is being able to communicate to people so that they understand what it is that is being presented to them. In fact, so important is that ability to communicate that I generally do not hire people who do not have the ability to speak in front of crowds. Because it does not matter how much you know when you're a safety professional. If you can't relate to people, all that knowledge is stuck in your head and nobody is giving you the time of day. So I think there's a lot of work that we need to do to really get into people's headspace and help them with making those decisions much easier. Yep. Angel.
I first wanted to start by saying it was an excellent presentation, and I really want to thank you for it. But you, even in your presentation, you were hinting, perhaps, if you forgive me for being blunt, the reality is that in the Caribbean, we come from a culture that is not long-term in its perspective. It's very short.
Yes.
And so the incentive for immediate gratification is throughout the Caribbean, from as far north as Bahamas all the way down to Guyana. The reality is the cultural leaders and political leaders in the country replicate that throughout.
Yeah.
Isn't it a little difficult in the long term for the sustainability of the industry and also in the short term to hope to extract from this cultural mass where short-term gratification is the order of the day and everything we do is driven that way, and hope to extract a workforce in a relatively short period of time that is going to be able to operate in that environment.
Yeah.
And by the time you add, I'm glad you mentioned the union in Trinidad, by the time you add all the insecurities that tend to come and mask our inadequacies, what would you recommend that needs to be done at the leadership level in the community, and I don't necessarily mean political leadership, just leadership level, to start to create a workforce that could really service this industry in the long term?
Excellent question. First of all, I want to underscore something you picked up on there, and it's something that Bobby mentioned in his introduction, is the importance of leadership. The saying goes, monkey see, monkey do, right? Of course, nobody here is a monkey. But if I yawn, somehow we are programmed that somebody else in the audience will then instinctively yawn, right? We do pick up on the things that we see our leaders doing. And so I think that in order to safeguard against that instant gratification culture, the best thing you can do is invest in developing some leaders at that level. One of the companies I worked for was BHP Bulletin, and I was really surprised by how they focused on growing leaders from the ground up, because eventually, you know, they will be working in the industry and in the company long enough to assume leadership roles, but it did not mean that we needed to wait until that time to develop them. What we have to do is find those outliers, as it were, within your community and start developing them, because they're the ones who are going to be working in close quarters with, shall we say, the vast majority who are not so inclined. It's going to be quite a bit of a challenge, but that's the first place I would start. The second thing I would do is, what it means to me is that you have to spend more time crafting the incentives. And Bobby and I were talking about behavioral economics before we started. You have to take some time to craft the incentives to make it easy for people to comply. So I like telling stories, so if you haven't figured that out, I like telling stories. But there's a story of back in India when the British were the occupying force, and there was a problem with cobras in the city, and the commander in charge of the forces there didn't like cobras. So he set up an incentive scheme where he would pay the locals a certain amount of money for every skin of a cobra that they turned in. So it was working really well. They were paying money and they were getting cobra skins, and like, good, we're killing cobras. Until they found out that people had started cobra farms. At which point they stopped the incentives, and all the cobra farms released their cobras into the society, making the problem worse. So you have to be careful about the incentives that you craft in the general sense, but knowing that people are inclined to a more instant gratification, a more short-term view of meeting their needs and wants, you've got to craft the incentives that make it easier for them to do the right thing. Now, is that easy to do? No. But you're probably going to have to engage a lot more specialized assistance to make sure the whole thing is set up to give you the result that you want. That's probably the best I can offer right now. I can do some more research and get back to you. The microphone survived.
Hi. Based on the talks of communication that you said, right, and how all these, like the trainees, for example, when you're giving the example that the trainees, they form back into their collective self when things go wrong, right? Now, based on this, and being in South America at the moment, we have a diverse language population. How does the language barrier affect communication and safety? Because you did raise communication as one of the main aspects.
It is extraordinarily important in the field of operations and safety in particular to agree upon a common language. Now, on this rig that I referenced here, everybody on the facility spoke English. But in one of the incidents, we found that different people had different ways of trying to stop the job. So I'll illustrate. So one guy will do this. Another guy will do this. And there are infinite other signals that they would try to use. Right, this. And what we found is that there was a general confusion on something as basic as that in how they communicate, look, I want to stop the job. So what we ended up having to do was to agree on a rig-wide agreed methodology or signal to stop the job. So if you're finding that in a single language scenario, you're having these kinds of communication difficulties, it becomes infinitely more difficult when you have multiple languages. It's not an insurmountable challenge. As I pointed out, this rig worked in Malaysia before, and so you had Malaysians and the same expats and so forth. And you had to, in those cases, print all the procedures in dual languages. That's a start. one in English and the other one, I think it was Malay, but there was another one, they had also worked in Thailand, so they had to do some other language as well. But they had to start there, make sure that they have access to the information in their native language. Now obviously that's something you're going to have to start looking at from the recruitment stage, because you're going to know where your workforce is coming from, how many different languages you're dealing with.
A great lecture.
Thank you.
No one's owned that I could see. I asked for the mic because I want to comment on this language. Comment. You can all speak the same language and you can mean very different things. Because language finds its meaning in usage.
Yes.
I'll give you an example. An example that I used to give when I gave lectures on communication. You ask a person in the Rupununi savannas where a certain place is and how far it is. And he or she might say, just round the corner. Meaning the village 10 or 15 miles close by. You ask the same question in Georgetown, just round the corner has a very different meaning. So be careful with the solution of just speaking the same language.
Correct. Fully endorse that. In fact, that actually sounds like Aberdeen. Yeah, it's just 100 yards down the road and 4 miles later you're still walking. Lars?
Yeah, hi, Ed. Again, I think wonderful presentation on safety, and good to see the enthusiasm you can put behind a subject like this. Great. One thing you didn't touch on, and I think it's probably something that's going, with Guyana at an embryonic phase in the oil and gas business, an opportunity to look at is the impact of gender diversity. And, a lot of the statistics I think discussed here probably reflected a male-dominated industry. And I think it'd be interesting to hear from you, Ed, and your perspective on where do you see Guyana starting out and potentially starting out on a different footing, with respect to gender diversity in the industry and what impact that could have.
Yeah, great question. I'm particularly glad my wife is not here now. When I started in the industry 20 years ago, it was an all-male experience, right? And then in 2003, I went to the UK to do some training on one of the platforms there. And I was taken aback when I saw that women were working on the facility offshore with regularity. They were assigned rooms like everybody else. It was no big deal, but for me it was a bit of an eye-opener. Since then, I'm happy to report that profile has changed dramatically in Trinidad. I still think that we don't have enough. Maybe we haven't gone as far as we could in terms of the offshore inclusion of women. But I think that Guyana, being at this particular stage, this is your opportunity to start at that point. So as you develop local content policies and workforce policies, that might be something that you would want to include going forward, so that you give equal opportunity throughout your talent pool to be able to make a contribution to the industry and see how it develops from there. I remember from one of the incidents that we had on board the rig, I remember having a safety stand down with the crew. And one of the things that we discussed was some of the differences between men and women, right? So there's the classic adage of a man and his wife are driving and they're lost. The wife wants him to stop and get directions, and he says, no, honey, I know where I'm going. And it really underscores the predilection that males have to go into uncertainty. They're quite comfortable with it, whereas women take a more risk-averse view of the world. And I remember my comment to them was, guys, we need to be able to see these jobs a little more like women than just like men, because women are able to look at a situation and identify the risk in it in a way that is more holistic than the way a group of men would. Add to that, when you consider that the type of man who works offshore tends to be your alpha male type, right? So when you add that to the mix, it really distorts how they view an operation, how they view the risks, and how they prepare for them. So I think it really is an opportune moment in time for Guyana to really set that straight at the outset.
I have a little concern here. I see we're dealing with the issue of cultural impact and safety. Guyana have a situation where I think we're responsive to situations and not looking at a problem and dealing with it before. At least a lot of what we're seeing happening today is situations like that. I've looked at an incident a few years ago, we're talking about 15 years ago, where there was an oil spill. At which stage should we look at, if we have an incident like that, what measures we can take to, let's say, protect the biodiversity and that kind of stuff that would be affected by this? Do we have practice sessions? Do we have drills? Do we have training? What do we have here, or what should we implement to protect against situations like that?
So great question, and I'll try to answer it from the Trinidad perspective, because I can't really sit here and speak to what actually is in place in Guyana, although I'm very confident it will be very similar. So first of all, before anybody is allowed access by the state to utilize acreage for the purpose of drilling for oil, one of the things they typically have to submit is an environmental impact assessment, where environmental studies would have had to been done to identify the sensitive areas, what are the potential impacts on those areas if there's an incident of that level. Typically, what energy companies do is, when they're setting up an operation for the first time, one of those elements of that system that they put in place is the emergency response plan. And of course, because we're drilling for oil, people aren't so worried about gas for some reason, but particularly in the case of oil, they have to have plans that are outlined and concrete as to how they intend, how they propose to treat with potential spills, and submit that to the government for approval. So that is certainly the case in the Trinidad jurisdiction. What also takes place there, and this may give you some comfort, but the operators in Trinidad all cooperate on the resources needed to execute oil spill response throughout the coastlines of Trinidad and Tobago. And they do hold drills. They do a number of tabletop drills, but at a frequency of once or twice per year. They usually have a full deployment where they actually send the choppers out, they send crews to the beaches, they actually practice deploying the spill booms, the dispersants, and so forth. So they actually do a more exhaustive drill. So my general assumption is it's the same type of regime that has been set up here in Guyana, and we certainly wouldn't expect Exxon to come in here without that kind of capability already built in.
I felt like it was an aviation safety management system seminar here because your content was so very similar to us, and it's very heartening to know that the two industries share quite a lot of modus operandi, and we do things the same way. One of the things I will take away from this is the concept of indulgence, which is not a concept that we use, but pretty much explains and simplifies a lot of issues. One of the things we find is your Trinidadian data is very similar to what obtains here. It's very similar. I would hazard to say it's almost the same, basically. So one of the ways we have found with our safety management system is to be anonymous in passing on information. So we will have a box, and the box is placed in an very obscure location where there are no cameras or anything of the sort, and there are forms and there's everything there, and if you have an issue and you don't want to voice it, just write it and put it in the box. And one of the things that's important to ensure that people put complaints in the box is that if it goes into the box, there's a visible response to the complaint that you're putting in the box or suggestion it deals with.
Yeah, brilliant. And just let me say that the oil and gas business still has a lot to learn from the aviation business. The one thing that the two industries have in common is that when things go bad, the whole world knows. Right? If you're cutting planks of wood and you have a lumber factory and things go bad, nobody hears about it. But if a rig burns down or a plane crashes, everybody in the world knows. And so that's why the expectation and the demand upon our industries to get safety right is so high, and rightfully so, because a lot of people are impacted when things go bad. To your second point with the anonymous box, that's the behavior-based safety management, behavior-based safety that I was talking about in the 4 key elements of getting safety right. Having a culture where people can document their concerns, that there is no retribution of any kind, but as you rightly pointed out, there's a visible correction of all the issues that have been identified, and that's where the action tracking comes in.
Okay, I was just wondering, I remember years ago, they had a spill, it was an Exxon spill actually, Valdez.
Yes, 1988, the Exxon Valdez.
Yeah. And then they did not have, at the time, a manual of best practices. And we are not in the oil and gas industry, so of course I didn't follow it verbatimly to see what was happening. Then they had the BP spill not too long ago, and they did not have a manual of best practices. So I'd like to know what really happens in this discipline, in this area, if it should not be mandatory that there is a manual, a global manual, if even it has to be, that people in the field of oil and gas has to follow.
Yes. Excellent, excellent question. So in the case of the Exxon Valdez, I was still a teenager at the time, so I'm a little fuzzy on what actually existed at the time. I think
the guy was drunk.
Yeah, the guy was drunk. That's what I was about to say. So, yeah. But there are a number of incidents that have been considered as watershed moments in the energy sector. The Exxon Valdez spill is one of them. The Piper Alpha disaster, which was the year before, is one of them. And of course, the Deepwater Horizon, which is the BP event that we just talked about. At every one of those stages, it changes the way we do business. We learn something fundamental and we change and adapt to what we have learned. So, whereas in the case of the Exxon Valdez and the Piper Alpha disaster, there were some pretty glaring gaps that were missing and changed the way that all energy sector companies operate going forward. In the case of the BP, the Deepwater Horizon, I think it's a little different. It's not that there wasn't a plan. It's not that they did not know what the plan was. I think it was more of a case of the technical limits in being able to treat with what they were presented with. The disaster as it unfolded presented certain challenges with being able to seal off the flow of oil. Now, I don't want to get into all the technical things because I haven't really paid too much attention to all the finite details. I try not to look at oil field films because they're notoriously inaccurate. That's just my...
What a motivation element in that you haven't mentioned.
Yes.
That's profit versus safety.
Yes. Those are more to the incentives that I was speaking about earlier. I did want to see the film, but haven't gotten around to it yet. The bottom line is, I think Deepwater Horizon, in and amongst all the other things that led to the incident, there were some technical challenges that were difficult to meet in the particular scenario. But again, as a result of this incident, the industry is responding with new technology, developing new technology and new capability to be able to respond to that. So the industry is not perfect. Certainly we've had our share of pretty damning lessons that we've had to learn, but I think the industry has always responded in a way that moves the level of performance higher the next time around.
Thank you very much, Edward. I think the question is there a manual? I think all energy companies have a manual for how they are to respond to these things. As I said, there's some technical challenges, so that's a separate part. But there are companies like DNV, GL, and some other well-respected classification societies that are working on standards and have produced standards to be able to address the response to these things in the future. Edward, your presentation was very informative. You started off by focusing from a national point of view and a global point of view that the Sustainable Development Goal, you started off by also saying that safety is good business, and we saw that through your presentation, but of course there are challenges, in particular the costs and the legal aspect of it. And for an industry that is emerging like Guyana, we must focus on a plan, procedures, and strategies, but the emphasis should be on the people that are involved in the oil and gas industry, and that's where you made reference to a cross-culture workplace. Guyana is a diversified economy of people. We are a culture of 6 different races. There might be others here who have been embedded in our society. And of course, everyone would like to have a respective opportunity to be part of this new and emerging industry. We are faced with challenges of language and communication. Even simply us talking to each other are sometimes challenges. I think Mr. Nascimento mentioned that the optimal point is to be careful with using the same language and people saying the same things, but they're saying it differently. You also indicate to us that one of the most important things in safety culture and safety policy is how do the workers respond to authority and how do they communicate with them. You mentioned your 6 dimensions of culture in which you focus on 4, and you also spoke about where you are and where you want to be and how you get there in an industry and in the development of the industry is very important. There is no shortcut in the development of a hazardous industry like the oil and gas, even though there have been many implementations of safety regulations globally, and I'm sure Guyana, as well as the operators here in Guyana, will adapt those to ensure that there aren't any accidents of the nature that have taken place over the decades in the offshore industry. And you've also indicated to us that in order to do the right job, it might not always be the simplest thing or the easiest thing to do, but once you do it right, the safety of the people are very important. So we really want to thank you for this presentation. It's insightful. We are grateful to have it now, given that we have some offshore Guyanese. I know we were supposed to have it in April during Safety Week, but we are very grateful to have it now. I think those who are in attendance and those who are watching online have walked away and have gone away with learning a little bit more about safety, not only in the development of an emerging oil and gas sector, but in their everyday lives. So thank you very much. GOGA would like to formally thank El Dorado Offshore for assisting us in this forum here, and in particular, Kerry Gravesandi and her entire team. Ladies and gentlemen, could we give El Dorado Offshore a round of applause? Our next public lecture will be in August, in the second week in August, and it will focus on corporate social responsibility in the development of an emerging oil and gas sector. More information will be shared in the media. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. Thank you.